You're listening to the Doctors In podcast from martinclinic.com. Although we share a lot of practical and, in our opinion, awesome information, what you hear on this podcast is not intended to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent any disease. It's strictly for informational purposes. So enjoy. Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctors In podcast, and this is episode 159. And today what we want to do is talk about a couple of new studies that have come out in the last few weeks, specifically for brain health. Some really fascinating, real interesting studies have come out, and it's kind of reinforced a lot of things that we've been talking about, but really interesting stuff. So we're going to go through that. It's kind of funny. We're recording this podcast. It's getting near the end of 218, and you know, all the imaging that we have, right? MRIs and CAT scans and all the abilities, the dissection over the years, all this technology, and they're still discovering new systems in the body that they never knew existed.
Yeah, imagine, eh?
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember last year, I might have been even the beginning of this year, they discovered a new ligament in the knee, right? I mean, how many knee surgeries has there been? How many images, MRI images of the knee? And they've discovered a new ligament, and they thought it was just part of another thing, and they realized it's a separate structure. It has a very specific function. So it's always fascinating when they find, and you know, really what happens is every time we get better imaging and we're able to take a higher magnified picture, they see another layer of stuff that they'd never seen. Now, what's interesting about the system that was recently discovered, it has to do with our brain. You see, because the rest of our body has a plumbing system, right? You have an excretory system. You know, your lungs are part of that. Your liver's part of that. Your kidneys part of that. Sweat glands. And they help filter out. Because if you think about it, it's really interesting when you think about it that in order to make energy, right? We make energy in the form of ATP. And, you know, everything we eat gets broken down and converted into energy or stored and all these things. But when you make energy, there's byproducts of that. Right? There's a waste.
A waste product.
Yeah, and
it's like a manufacturing plant, right?
And they're actually quite toxic, right? Mm-hmm. The proteins get toxic. You get toxic protein. You get it's just junk. It's just waste. So you have a bunch of mechanisms in place inside your body, sweat, breathing, urinary, all that kind of stuff to get rid of the waste, right? Before we get too far, this is an interesting bit of trivia. Most people might have heard this by now, but people always say, well, what happens to the weight that you lose? Right? You burn it off. Where does it go? Right? I mean, how does a person who loses 100 pounds, where does it go? Like when they say you're burning off your fat, but most people don't realize you're breathing it away. Right? It's just, that's what happens to the fat that you eventually break down. And eventually you end up breathing it away. So that's what happens to the weight that you lost, right? It just went away. But so it's interesting. Whenever you make energy, there's a byproduct, there's a waste. And our liver and all that stuff, that's what it does, right? Your lymphatic system will go through the tissues, pull the junk out of there, filter it out. That's what happens. So,
very complex.
Yeah, it's you know, a lot of people are very sick because they're not able to do that properly, right?
Yeah.
They don't have enough glutathione, for example, which is the
master detoxer.
That's right. Sulfur-based, sticky, sticks to junk, pulls it out of your body.
Like Velcro,
right? And people always say, well, what's glutathione? Just think of Velcro. It just sticks to all the junk. And then it also recycles your antioxidants. And so it's a really complex, interesting, fascinating system that you have in place to get rid of waste. And it's like your plumbing system, right? Well, they've always wondered about the brain. They knew, well, you know, we put out an interesting stat in a newsletter that went out not long ago. And, you know, we talked about how the brain is less than 2% of your body mass, right? So 2% of your whole body mass, if you step on a scale and it says 200 pounds,
2% of that is your brain.
Is your brain, right? That roughly your brain.
Unless you're a fathead.
Yeah, unless you're a fathead. But roughly 2% of your body weight's your brain. That's it. However, your brain uses up about 25% of your body's energy.
Now that's incredible.
That's how much energy your brain needs to function, to maintain function.
Well, it's headquarters, right?
Yep. I always say the brain is at the head of a multi-level company, right? It's the top. It takes a piece of everything. It gets the most of it. The guys at the bottom need less, and the guy at the top takes it all. It takes 25% of the energy. So 2% of your body mass is using 25% of your energy. So there has to be a lot of waste.
Yeah.
A lot of waste. And
a lot of brain waste.
A lot of brain waste. And scientists and researchers never were quite able to figure out the plumbing system of the brain. They couldn't figure it out. They knew there had to be one because, like I said, there's a lot of waste that's going on. And sure enough, they discovered recently a whole new system. And they called it the glymphatic system, right?
Not the lymphatic, the glymphatic.
The glymphatic system. And they found that this system is your brain's plumbing system. And so that's what happens. And you need this system functioning properly. Otherwise, you're in trouble. If you're not filtering out all that toxic junk, you're in trouble, right? So they know that. And so anyways, what I found interesting is when they discovered this system, they actually found that it's most active at nighttime. In fact,
when you sleep.
When you're sleeping, they found the activity of the glymphatic system doubles at nighttime. So that's how important sleep is to a healthy brain. So if you think of the domino effect of poor sleep has, I mean, if you're not going into your REM, we already talked about this before, but one of the stages of sleep, when you're going through that REM, it's like your brain's doing a dump. It's like it's cleaning itself out. It's imprinting. I always say that what you see in a daytime, at nighttime, it's like if you're working on if you're working on a project all day, and then at the end of the day you push save, and then it just files it away. That's how your brain works. It imprints the memories at nighttime when you're sleeping, and that's why a lot of drugs that affect your sleep affect your memory, because you're just not going through.
You're not saving.
Yes, right. You're not uploading the mainframe, right? And that's
a lot of people should, just to get sidetracked for one split second, like just to remind people, be careful about, because some people they take a sleeping pill and they live on it. Like every day they take it and they think, well, it's just a little pill, but you ain't saving on a sleeping pill.
Well, I find that's a terrible name, first of all, because you're not sleeping.
Yeah.
They call them a
sedated pill.
Yeah, sedating.
It's a knockout pill.
Knockout pill. Because you're not going through the full REM cycles. You're not going through all the stages of sleep. Long-term use of that, they know that is not good for you. Yet a lot of people are on them long term.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's fascinating. That's how important sleep is to your brain, because that glymphatic system, that drainage, because your brain is an enclosed system when it comes to blood flow. It's got its own blood-brain barrier. It's very selective what it allows to cross that into your brain. So all those things, the brain has its own little unique plumbing system that drains it out of there and then eventually gets discarded out. So it's fascinating stuff. So if you're not sleeping properly, you're at a much higher risk of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Because one of the things it does is they found that this glymphatic system clears those amyloid plaques. They found, and what they did is they found mice that, when they fooled around with the mice and it didn't have that glymphatic system, they cleared it at a rate of 50% slower. So
toxins are sitting there, heavy metals, things like Candida albicans, and
all that stuff, and just
all stuff
causing
that goes through the brain.
You can see sleep is one of those things that, when you're having sleeping issues, it's a huge pain. But not only is it a pain in the present, it's a massive pain in the future. And your brain and sleep, like sleep and brain health go hand in hand. If somebody is chronically not sleeping well, they are going to absolutely have brain issues when they're older. So that's one of the things that happens. Now, as we move on to the next study that we found. So the first study was just talking about the discovery of this glymphatic system and how the brain actually drains itself. So that was fascinating. The second one, what I find interesting, is a study that was done talking about the stress hormone, one that we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
We wrote about in our serial killer book, The 2 Hormones That Want You Dead. Cortisol is one of the hormones that wants you dead. They found that cortisol is linked to early on your ability to think, your ability to process memories. So again, think of stress. Yeah. Stress kills your sleep, right? Like we said this many times. But the number one cause of poor sleep in adults is high circulating cortisol. And now now they're not sleeping, they're not draining their brain properly, they're not setting their memories. They're also so it's affecting their brain that way, but it also affects cortisol directly affects their ability to think properly as they age. So just again, interesting effects. And when we talk about cortisol, the more we look into cortisol, the more we find the connections to everything else.
Yeah.
That's why we call it the accelerant, right? Cortisol will accelerate. It's like jet fuel.
Yeah.
It will send you in that direction you're going in bad. It just makes it that much worse. Yeah. If you have a bad gut, cortisol makes your gut even worse. If you have sore joints, cortisol makes your joints even worse.
And it's usually, you've said this many a time, but cortisol is the accelerant. The inflammation is already there, and then it's putting gasoline on the fire big time, and jet fuel gas, right? It makes it worse, right?
And what's interesting is with this study, they found that higher cortisol levels in the blood, so when they measured cortisol levels, they found actual physical changes in the brain that are often seen, and this is what the study says, as precursors to Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia. So, I mean, that's the effect that cortisol has on the brain. Cortisol is another pathway to Alzheimer's or dementia. And with particularly, they found, first of all, if you have higher levels of cortisol, the person performed worse on memory, organization, visual perception, and attention. And it makes sense. Think of what happens to your brain when you're really stressed, right? Those are the things that kind of go away. Well, imagine that now on a long term. But what was interesting was the link between high cortisol levels and performance was worse in women. It seems to affect women's brains even more than a man's brain. You and I talked about a few episodes ago how cortisol affects men testosterone-wise. Women, it affects everything. I mean, now we already know it messes their thyroid, it affects their estrogen levels, kills their progesterone levels, but we also see now that it actually affects their brain. So one of the side effects of high cortisol is brain issues.
Yeah.
And we know that. I mean, that's stuff, somebody that has high levels of cortisol, they generally do have brain fog or they have some kind of brain issue. But it's interesting. Research is catching up to that, something that we've seen.
And if you take it another step in the sense that traditionally you get, if you have cortisol, maybe your anxiety levels are good. What do? You're often put on a medication. And again, we talked about anything that puts you to sleep, but any kind of med that plays around with your hormones, your serotonin and these type of things, your feel good hormones. I mean, think of it. These things affect your brain over a period of time. And it's a double whammo. It might give you temporary relief, but it's just sedation.
That's all it is.
It's driving down the highway, you hear a knock in the engine, and let's turn the radio up. It's not fixing it. You got to go after the cortisol and fix it. Get it down.
And we should probably say one more thing, and this is also, I find interesting, is that cortisol does not distinguish between physical and emotional stress.
Yeah.
Mental or physical, the body just reacts. It doesn't distinguish between the two. So it could be a physical stress, it could be an emotional stress, it could be a mental stress, it could be anything. Cortisol, it's just cortisol is like cowbell, right? Like the old Saturday Night Live skits.
Yeah.
You
just need more cowbell.
Cowbell fixes everything. You just need more cowbell. That's what your body does. Stress, here's cortisol. Got more stress, more cortisol.
Yeah.
And then
whether you're being scared at night because somebody's coming behind you or a tiger's chasing you or
you're sitting at a desk stressed with life.
Yeah. It loves women because women have such a hard time. I mean, it's just they can't turn their brain off. And then it's just a vicious cycle. They can't sleep. And they're up. They might fall asleep. They're exhausted. And then they're up.
Well, I remember reading a paper about a study, and I got some actual press behind it, how men, we actually have a place in our brain that we can go to that nothing. So when a guy says, what are you thinking about? We say nothing. Literally, we have the ability sometimes to think about nothing. So it's interesting. We can sometimes say, literally nothing. Whereas women don't have that nothing box in a sense. Their brain's just going. And we see that cortisol affects their brain differently. And studies are starting to show that it seems to be affecting them, especially when it comes to a lot of the mental thinking. Cortisol just seems to affect that. So it's interesting, which again is why we talk a lot about insulin. We talk a lot about cortisol. those are the things that can just rob you of your health, and from head to toe. And the more we're studying cortisol, the more we see the effect on the brain. Just fascinating. And one more study that we want to talk about quickly here about the brain, and this has to do specifically with DHA. They found that DHA may actually bypass what they call a faulty brain transport in Alzheimer's disease. So they find, well, first of all, DHA, because people always say, well, what do you mean by DHA? Well, DHA is a type of omega-3 fatty acid, right? It's a type of omega-3. There are different types of omega-3. EPA is another well-known one. There's DHA, and we're fans of DHA. We like EPA as well. But for what we see and what we do, we really like DHA because DHA makes up a big percentage of the brain.
Yeah.
You know, your brain is, 60% fat?
Yeah.
And
that's what I said. If someone calls you fathead, take it as a compliment, right?
And DHA makes up 30% of the lipids in your brain, just DHA. So that's how important, and that's why studies have shown people that have blood levels, like chronically low blood levels of DHA, have smaller brains. Their brain shrinks. Well, it makes sense. If 30% of your brain volume is DHA and you're not getting it, it only makes sense that your brain will shrink. And as we've said before, as you age, your brain shrinks. That's normal. It isn't normal if it shrinks too fast. So DHA, that's interesting. But what they found, which is, think of the effect that this can have, because one of the problems that people have with brain as they age is this concept of type 3 diabetes, right? Where the brain can become insulin resistant. The brain can become diabetic.
Yeah. The brain becomes diabetic before you do, really, right? You know, we've always said it too, right? Is that the body will do everything it can so that you're not diabetic. Take sugar out of your bloodstream. It's so tightly regulated. We always
your
go
blood,
over that.
It puts the priority on keeping it out of your blood, so you'll put it everywhere else. And eventually your organs pay the price. And the brain, one of the problems with the brain with diabetes, they found when the brain becomes diabetic or type 3 diabetes and they get dementia, Alzheimer's, is there's a problem with the way that the brain glucose is used. There's an uptake problem by the cells. They can't utilize that energy properly anymore because of the cells have basically become insulin resistant. They just don't work as well as they used to. But what they found is DHA
helps.
It actually promotes brain glucose uptake, and it does that by regulating specific proteins. So DHA is so important for brain health. It's just absolutely
one of our foundational things that we talk about.
Yeah, when we talk about, we have a great presentation that by the time this podcast comes out should be available on our website. It's just a presentation that you and I did called Age Proofing Your Brain.
Mm-hmm.
And, we really put it together for people that are worried about the health of the brain as they age because, one of the problems that occurs is that their body tends to outlive their brain. And again, if the brain uses 25% of the energy, it's a beast. And the beast needs to be fed. It needs the proper nutrients. So there's a lot of reasons why the brain, we call Breaking Bad, like the TV show, why the brain goes bad. There's a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah. And
so we did that presentation. And in that presentation, we talk a lot about different causes, different things that will cause the brain to break down. It always starts with inflammation, but there's a lot of different reasons why people end up with inflammation. For example, some may end up with inflammation because of high circulating insulin. So they're diabetic. Half the people with dementia have higher insulin. So that affects a majority of the people. That's food. And then we talk about as well the effect that leaky gut has on inflammation in the brain.
Yeah.
And then we talk about free radical damage. So there's a lot of
oxidative damage. Yeah.
There's not one cause for everybody. But if you reverse engineer, which we do in that presentation, Alzheimer's, dementia, you go back. Inflammation was there, but what caused that inflammation? But in there as well, we share with you some of the things that we recommend for brain health. And, we talk a lot about DHA. Of course, we talk about curcumin because curcumin and DHA are like the dynamic duo for the brain. They play off each other. They're very synergistic.
Yeah.
And then we talk about a few other things like we like
B12,
nootropic. We like, there's certain ones that we like. But DHA, again, it's one of those things we just think everybody should be taking some form of an omega-3, preferably DHA.
High DHA. Read your labels, folks. Like when you look at an omega, all omega-3 is good. You get 1,000 milligrams in a capsule, and people, I said, well, turn around, read the label. You'll understand it very quickly. Look and see how much DHA is in there. There'll be DHA and EPA. And for a lot of people, they go, "Oh, I'm taking 1,000 milligrams." No, you're not.
You're getting like
you're getting 1,000 milligrams of total omega-3. But you got to look and see how much DHA.
Yeah, if they add up the EPA and DHA, it's always less than 400 milligrams, maybe 150 DHA.
Out of that 1,000 milligrams, you got 200 or 300 maybe. But so the higher the DHA is a long chain. The reason it's so good. I mean, not your brain's made up of it, but it's that healthy long chain fatty acid. And the longer it is, the more bioavailable it is. Your body is able to take it. It's utilized better, and it's absorbed better in your system.
And it's a great source of fuel for the brain.
Yep,
the brain
your brain loves it.
Brain loves it. Well, we want to thank you for listening to this episode. We enjoyed doing it. We're almost, like I said, boy, it's crazy. Eh? We're recording this. It's last day today, Halloween today, last day of
sugar
October. Yeah. Yeah,
good luck.
People are bouncing off the walls already. But yeah, it's amazing how fast time's flying. Yeah. But we're entering into that season now where the sun is just not there. We're not exposing our arms, we're not exposing our legs anymore. So this is the time of year where you also want to start thinking about vitamin D3. Make sure that you're getting enough of that. So again, thank you for listening. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Doctor Is In podcast from martinclinic.com. If you have any questions, you can reach us at info@martinclinic.com. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, you can head to our website and sign up for free. We also have a private Facebook group that you can join. It's a community of awesome people. Finally, I do a Facebook Live every Thursday morning at 8:30. Join us again next week for a new episode.